Recording. Alright, we've got sound. I thought I'd use my good mic because I basically have nothing else to do. Let's cut the shit just for a second. Now don't get me wrong, I love a good piece of kit, but it seems the more I review equipment, the more we check out all these new latest mirrorless cameras, there seems to be one thing that makes me rethink how I want to do reviews. That is that no focus joystick, no touchscreen, no amazing viewfinder is going to make your work any better than it would have been before all this stuff. However, I do think gear reviews are pretty important, and it's the way I buy most of my stuff, and a good, honest, clutter-free gear review is a really good way to figure out what exactly you want, but no review is going to actually give you a hands-on feel for a camera or just sort of really give you the experience of using it in a real-world situation. So in my view, nothing is going to replace actually borrowing one for a good amount of time, not just in a camera store, having it set up for you for somebody that maybe uses the camera, and going out and using it in the field like you would every day. So today, instead of the usual review, I thought I would go over each camera and tell you the bits that I really like about them, and you can just decide for yourselves whether those features are important to you or not in your workflow. With that, remember that I am a full-time wedding photographer and videographer, so some of the priorities that I have may not be priorities for you. So take what you will from this review, put it all together in the parts that are important to you, and I think you'll find it's pretty easy to make the decision that you need. So with that in mind, today we are having a look at 3 of the most popular choices for professionals looking at going into mirrorless or maybe just upgrading your camera to one of these new generation cameras. We have the Nikon Z6, the Canon EOS R, and my dirty old A7R III, which has been thrashed through the ringer. So bearing in mind there is other options like the A7 III, the Nikon Z7, the EOS RP, and most of these things are going to translate between those cameras. So for today's video, I'm going to keep resolution out of it because all of these cameras are vastly different, and there's alternatives in each brand to get the resolution that you want with most of the other features all these cameras have. So let's get into it. We're going to break this down into categories, starting with color science. I'm not actually going to start with color science. Let's talk about LCD screens. For me, in my mind, it's pretty clear where the Sony sits, and that's way out the back, with the Nikon and the Canon being far out in front. The Sony has been lacking for quite a number of years in the LCD screen department. Really, none of them are amazing. The A9 Mark II and the A7R IV is probably the best you're going to get, but it's still not as good as the Nikon Z series or the Canon EOS series. The A7R III is definitely better than the A7 Mark III, so bear that in mind, but generally speaking, the LCD screen on the Sony needs to be improved quite a lot. With that said, they do kind of all get the job done. It's not really super important, I guess, but it is something that I notice day to day, and I would really like to have a better LCD screen. Whether it's a tilty screen or a flippy screen, that's going to be totally up to you. I know there's probably 50-50, want either one, but to be honest, I don't really like the flippy screen, and if it comes out in the A7 Mark IV, it's probably a deal breaker for me, and I wouldn't buy it unless it's going to be dedicated to YouTube videos like my A7 Mark III, which I'm filming on now. So maybe I would buy one. So talking about screens, let's talk about the viewfinders. Now the EOS R is definitely my favorite out of these 3 in particular cameras. The Z6 followed slightly behind, and the Sony again being in last place. Now the A7R III is better than the A7 III by quite some margin, but the A7R IV and the A9 Mark II have better viewfinders than all these cameras combined, which is the same one found in the Panasonic S1 and S1R. So if you want to see kind of the best of the best in terms of mirrorless viewfinders, have a look through the R4 or the Panasonic S1, S1R, and you'll really see what a good viewfinder looks like. But we're talking about these 3 cameras today, and the EOS R and the Nikon Z series definitely have better viewfinders than the A7R Mark III or the A7 Mark III. Now talking about the bodies and how they are to hold and some of the features on the bodies themselves, I think anybody that's not emotionally attached to the camera brand is going to tell you the EOS R is quite clearly the nicest to hold. Bearing in mind, again, I do have pretty large hands, but if you have just normal size hands, I think anybody really is going to prefer the EOS R and how it is to hold in the hand. Followed close-ish kind of by the Nikon Z series. For me personally, I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does feel better than my Sony, which kind of feels like having to hold hands with your brother, like link fingers and everything. It doesn't feel nice to hold. The Sonys, you really have to do something to them unless you have a really small hand. I have the Mickey grip, which you can see here, and that makes it pretty much as good as the Canon EOS R, maybe a little bit behind, but it drastically changes the handling of the camera. They're just basically just far too small for anyone with normal to large size hands. The Nikon and the Canon have the little LCD screens on the top of them. I do like them. I'm not a huge fan of them. Like if they were to put it in the Sony and get rid of the exposure compensation dial, I'd probably be more upset about that. I'd rather have that dial than an LCD screen, which I'm probably not going to look at most of the day anyway. So it's a nice feature, but it's up to you whether it's something you want or not. Now, toughness and reliability of the cameras, I think it's probably a draw over the board. Bearing in mind also I haven't had the Nikon and the Canon on a long-term basis, and I haven't had them soaking wet like I have with my Sonys. So all of my Sonys, I've had them proper soaked and I haven't had any issues. I know some people have, and you're always going to find anybody that's going to have an issue with each of these cameras, so none of them are going to be perfect, but I feel like in terms of reliability, they're all going to be really, really solid. I know in the past, I've been shooting Sony for about 4 years now. I've had all of the pro models that you can get, except for the A7S series, and I've never had a single issue. Like I said, I have had them soaking wet as well. The only thing with the Sony cameras is you really need to have the hot shoe cover in, or some hipster tape if you want to cover it up that way. Next, let's get into card slots. Or let's just talk about lens mounts. So yes, I'm aware that the Nikon and the Canon have much larger mounts which allow for extra corner sharpness, less vignetting, and it's just better overall. The Sony really does have quite a small camera mount for being a full frame camera. Do I really care about that? Not so much, and I don't think a lot of people are going to either. But if you're talking about optical perfection, and it does sort of expand the range, being able to make lenses that have less vignetting and more corner sharpness and all that kind of stuff. But in a real world situation, I don't really think it matters that much. Sony obviously have a lot more lenses available at this point in the game, which is kind of ironic seeing as everybody was bitching and moaning about it when mirrorless started to come onto the game. But saying that, Nikon and Canon do have this kind of pro zoom lenses available, the 2.8 range. They have a bunch of prime lenses, and the lens lineup is growing pretty fast as well. But it definitely is worth noting that Sony have a lot more lenses available right now if it's something you're looking to switch into. Now I want to touch on video quickly, but more in a kind of hybrid shooting scenario where you're shooting photo and video at the same time. I'm not an expert, even though I do shoot a lot of video. I don't claim to be an expert on cinematography or anything like that. If you really want to know the details of each camera in terms of video features, I would recommend looking at a channel like Gerald Undone. He has fantastic videos and really knows his stuff much more than I do when it comes to video. Saying that though, they all have features and they all have ups and downs. For me, the Sony is the better overall camera, and it's a big reason why I switched in the first place. The only issue I have with it is it does suffer from a buffer lag time, so if you're taking a photo and then you switch to video, you do kind of have to wait 1, maybe 2 seconds before you can start recording, which can be a little bit of a pain. The Nikon handles that much better, where you can pretty much start recording video straight away. Same with the Canon. The only thing with the Canon is it doesn't have stabilization, which is kind of a deal breaker for me, but it's not going to be for everybody, so you can get stabilized lenses and all that kind of stuff as well. Just the range is a little bit lacking at the moment. Talking about stabilization, the Nikon definitely has an edge over the Sony. In terms of handheld footage, I can definitely get a smoother shot with the Nikon Z series cameras than I can with my Sony. Even though the Sony's pretty good, I just find the Nikon's just a slight step up in terms of video stabilization. With video quality in particular, they all shoot log profiles. The Nikon is soon to be upgraded, so you can shoot RAW through an external recorder like my Ninja V that I'm recording on now. The colors on them are all really good actually, although I've had a lot of practice with my Sony cameras, so I feel like I can get a better color in the end result with my Sony cameras, but that's purely because I've been working with them for so many years now. Whereas the Nikon and the Canon, I haven't had time to get used to the files, although straight out of the camera I do prefer the Canon colors when you're talking about video. So rather than talk about image quality, let's talk about editing the files, because I've had second shooters with me that have been on a Z6, I've had second shooters that have been with me on the EOS R. So editing those files, I have a really good feel to how they behave in the same situations that I'm using my Sony cameras in. It's pretty clear that the Canon and the Nikon have more dynamic range and they're better in low light than the Canon EOS R. I think everybody knows that. Canon have been a little bit behind the game in terms of dynamic range and low light for a little while now. The EOS R is still really good though. I believe it's the same sensor as the 5D4, which is plenty good in low light. They're all good enough. You just really have to adjust your shooting style to make sure you're not clipping highlights or getting too dark in the exposure with the Canon EOS R. But honestly, like I said, they're all really good, but the Sony and the Nikon do have an edge when it comes to low light and dynamic range, pulling back those skies and bringing the shadows up. So let's talk about usability now, and it's the last thing I'm going to talk about, but I feel like it's the most important thing. As a professional, I want a tool that's going to make my workflow easier. I don't want something giving me any stress, and I want all my images to be in focus as much as possible. And this is where the Sony really shines. And to be fair, Sony have had a lot of practice refining this mirrorless technology because it's really all they've been concentrating on. The Nikon and the Canon do focus well, but it's the way you go about using focus and the way the eye focus performs on the Sony cameras that just is far ahead of the pack, in my opinion. You can go and watch my other video that I made the other day about how exactly these cameras work with eye focus. I believe it's only a firmware update away for the Nikon and the Canon that it's going to be neck and neck with Sony, but at the moment the usability and how you go about using eye focus is different on the Sony, and it is better. If you've gotten this far into the video and you're about to go comment that you've programmed your Nikon or your Canon some function button to make it focus like the Sony, just don't, because you haven't. So that's pretty much it, guys. Like I've seen, and like you've just seen in this video, there's quite a few things that I don't like about the Sony. And if all these camera companies just looked at what each other is making, I feel like they could make a really powerful camera. And I think the next generation of these cameras is going to be one that really brings everything together, and you're just going to see a lot of impressive stuff on the market. Like I said in the start of this video, none of these cameras or changing system is going to really advance how you are as a photographer and just magically make you this amazing wedding photographer overnight. So it's really just, like I said, forgetting about the brand names and just concentrating on the features and deciding what is important to you, what you can afford, and just go from there. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate all you guys following along and giving me support over the years. I just realized it's been 2 years since I posted my first video, so my next video I'm going to go over the whole journey and everything that's happened with YouTube to show you guys how it's been. So I'll catch you in the next one.